Fred Lewis didn't just stumble onto a lucky break. He cracked open a dead mining pit in Oregon and exposed one of the richest channels the region has ever seen. What started as a forgotten hole in the ground quickly turned into a gold surge so insane it shut down his sluice, overloaded the wash plant, and forced the crew to rebuild their entire system just to keep up. Every shovel, every bucket, every scoop revealed something stranger and richer than the last. Old equipment buried under the pay, handwritten warnings from miners who quit because the gold was too much, and a channel so dense it looked manufactured, not natural. And when the first geological estimate came back, $95 million in recoverable gold, Fred realized he wasn't reviving an abandoned pit. He was unlocking a jackpot someone else walked away from, for reasons no one can explain. Before we begin, smash that like button and subscribe. This story deserves it. Fred Lewis stood at the edge of what locals still called the Dead Pit, a forgotten slice of Oregon earth that hadn't produced more than a handful of dust in decades. Every old-timer within 50 miles swore that anyone who tried to mine it ended up broke, angry, and convinced the ground itself was cursed. But Fred wasn't buying their stories. The first thing he noticed wasn't the barren tailings or the silence of an operation abandoned too many times. It was the paperwork, stacks of soil records scattered through county archives, revealing odd little gaps no one ever bothered to question, layers that didn't match the region, density readings with numbers that made no geological sense, footnotes about inconsistent samples that had been dismissed as clerical errors. And the more Fred read, the more one thing gnawed at him. The inconsistencies weren't mistakes. They were signals pointing to something deeper, something trapped, something everyone else had missed. So he walked the ground himself, boots scraping over dry gravel, hands brushing dust off the walls of the pit, searching for anything that didn't belong. And then he found it, a thin seam of soil, darker than the rest, running in a direction the old reports never mentioned. He scooped a pan of dirt, half expecting more disappointment. But as he washed it down, his breath caught. Sitting at the bottom of the pan wasn't the usual fine powder. These pieces were coarse, heavy, sharp-edged, and the color was wrong. Not the warm yellow of normal placer gold, but a deeper, almost burnished glow. Unnatural. The kind of gold that doesn't just fall into your lap unless something violent, ancient, and hidden forced it there. That was the moment Fred knew. The pit everyone abandoned had been hiding something it didn't want anyone to find. But the real twist came days later, when Fred made a discovery that would flip the entire story of this pit upside down. He'd been searching old sheds on the property, piles of rusting tools, crates of bolts, nothing useful, until he reached the last box shoved behind a collapsed workbench. Inside was a brittle, yellowing mining map that hadn't been touched in nearly a century. Most of the lines matched modern surveys, except one, a fault line drawn by hand, drifting sharply east when every official map placed it west. At first glance, it looked like a mistake, but when Fred traced the route of that hand-drawn fault and compared it to the strange soil samples, everything clicked. If that old miner had it right, then gold from an ancient deposit could have migrated downhill into a blind pocket, exactly where the abandoned pit now sat. And for 3 decades, every miner who ever tried to work this land dug in the opposite direction. They weren't unlucky, they were off target. Fred laughed. One of those short, sharp laughs you make when a crazy idea suddenly makes perfect sense, and then did the one thing no one else would have dared. He bet the entire operation on a theory written in pencil by a miner who died long before the Gold Rush TV cameras existed. And as if the universe wanted to reward that decision, something even stranger happened. When Fred scanned the exact section of ground where the map claimed the fault should be, his metallic detector screamed, a spike so strong and so clean it made his crew stop what they were doing. This wasn't iron, it wasn't scrap, it wasn't anything modern equipment could explain. Whatever was down there, the old map had pointed right at it. Fred ordered a full dig on that line. Excavators clawed into the earth, ripping through old failure layers, peeling back decades of wrong assumptions. And at first, everything looked normal. Just dirt, just gravel. Just more of the same disappointment that chased every miner who ever tried to make this pit work. Then the ground gave way. A full section of the wall collapsed, sending a cloud of dust rolling across the site and showering the crew in debris. Normally, that would mean shutting everything down, safety checks, reinforcements, but Fred didn't run from the exposed wall. He walked straight toward it, brushing away the dirt with his hands like someone unveiling a long-buried artifact. What was revealed underneath didn't look like Oregon soil at all. There, slicing through the newly exposed face, was a band of thick black clay. He'd seen it before, but never here. Black clay like this forms when gold settles in low oxygen pockets and gets trapped for centuries. It's rare, it's precious, and it absolutely should not exist in this part of Oregon. The geological books said it flat out didn't happen, but the ground itself was disagreeing with every expert who ever wrote those books. Fred called for a sample, then another, moving along the length of the band as if following the trail of something ancient and deliberate. The clay was thicker than expected, darker than expected, and as he worked deeper into it, the density readings on his scanner kept climbing. Something heavy was locked inside that layer. Something old. Something untouched. Still, Fred didn't let himself get excited. Not until the first shaker table cleanup came through. He watched as the water washed the pay dirt, pulling away the light material and revealing whatever the pit had been hiding. And the moment the first chunk slid into the catch tray, the crew froze. This wasn't regular gold. These were chunky, irregular pieces, their edges coated with flecks of dark red mineral. A mineral that didn't match the region, didn't match the soil, didn't match anything the crew had seen in Oregon mining. Every piece hinted at a new source, a deeper source, a source the old miners never reached. Fred stared at the tray, jaw tight, eyes scanning the strange mix of gold and red. He knew what the locals called this place. He knew what the old records claimed. But in that moment, none of it mattered. The dead pit was waking up, revealing its first secret, and it was only the beginning. As the crew sifted through the odd red-stained gold, Fred scraped a fresh sample from the exposed wall. The same spot tied to the old map, the misplaced fault line, and the impossible soil layers, and sent it for immediate testing, wanting to know what else the pit was hiding. The results came back with an answer no one expected. The red mineral coating the chunky gold wasn't rust, iron, or contamination from old machinery. It was cinnabar, dense, deep crimson, unmistakable. Cinnabar only forms under extreme heat events, powerful enough to melt, push, and reshape gold into pockets that act nothing like normal placer deposits. Suddenly, the entire pit snapped into focus. The mismatched soil layers, the bizarre readings, the heavy streaks, none of them were random. This wasn't a simple wash zone or a drift deposit. It was the product of an ancient, undocumented heat surge that concentrated gold into a natural trap so intense, most miners never encounter it in their lifetime. The pit wasn't dead. It had been engineered by nature itself and sealed just well enough that everyone before Fred missed what was really here. The crew circled the exposed wall again, running deeper probes into the black clay seam, now pulsing with possibility. One of the probes hit something that made the rig jump. Not rock, not clay, something dense. Something that sent a metallic echo up the shaft so heavy it rattled the casing. The density was far beyond any natural formation in that area, so Fred marked the spot instantly. He ordered the excavator to peel the wall back layer by layer, revealing whatever was hiding behind that unnatural weight. When the bucket finally scraped against it, the ground didn't give them gold. Not yet. It gave them structure. A flat, compacted plane of gravel running straight across the pit wall like a hidden floor. Too uniform, too smooth, too intentional. Nature doesn't compact gravel in a perfect plane. Humans do. Old miners did. Secretive miners, the kind who hid their best finds from each other, often laid down gravel shelves to create false bottoms, fake floors, to mislead anyone who came after them. But this shelf wasn't small. It wasn't thrown together. It stretched wider than the excavator's reach and ran deeper than any of the previous claim boundaries. Someone had put this here decades before Fred ever showed up, and they hid it well enough that every miner after them dug the wrong layers and missed the entire structure. Fred brought in the ground-penetrating scanner, running it across the full width of the shelf. The monitor lit up instantly. Not a small anomaly, not just a blip or a signal. The entire area beneath the shelf glowed with layered densities, thick zones, heavy pockets, and a signature that matched trapped, compacted pay dirt. But there was something else too. Pockets of unusually high reflectivity, clustered together in shapes that didn't match gravel or bedrock. Whatever was under the shelf wasn't just rich. It was massive, layered, untouched, and sealed beneath a deliberate barrier that no one had ever documented. Fred made the call to tear through the artificial shelf. The excavator carved into it carefully, breaking through the compacted stones until the machine punched into something softer. As the bucket curled back, what spilled out wasn't the usual dark Oregon dirt. It was river-washed gravel, bright, rounded, polished by water that hadn't flowed in this region for hundreds of thousands of years. And that could only mean one thing. An ancient river channel lay buried under the hidden shelf. A channel so old it never made it into modern geological surveys, never appeared on fault maps, and never showed up on soil records. Its existence alone was a shock. But what it carried inside would change everything. Fred knew that ancient channels could trap insane amounts of gold. They acted like natural vaults. Water flows shift, slow, and drop heavy material into pockets that grow richer each season until the river dies or gets buried. And this one looked untouched. No pick marks, no dig scars, no sign that even the secretive miners who built the shelf had ever reached it. Fred's crew cut the first test trench into the channel. The dirt looked ordinary at first, until the classifier caught something heavy. A pea-sized nugget rolled onto the tray, smooth, water-worn, bright, and unmistakably from a channel deposit. Then another rolled out, then another, and with every bucket of material, the nuggets increased in size. The crew pushed deeper. The gravel shifted from small stones to heavy cobbles, and the gold kept getting chunkier, thicker, more aggressive. This wasn't just a normal pay streak. Something upstream, something deep in the channel, was feeding it. Every bucket was richer than the last, every cleanup tray heavier. The deeper they dug, the more the channel revealed a pattern. This was a continuous flow of gold, not a scattered deposit. Something concentrated it in a stretch so short and so dense that no geological survey had ever predicted it. Fred knelt beside the trench, running pieces of gold through his fingers, weighing each one in disbelief. The origin of the nuggets wasn't just ancient, it was powerful. The combination of cinnabar, black clay, and channel-worn gold pointed toward a geological event most miners never encounter. The hidden shelf explained why nobody found it before, and the intensity of the nuggets hinted that the richest part of the channel still lay ahead. The crew widened the cut, exposing more of the riverbed. Each layer peeled back revealed more color. First dust, then flakes, then nuggets, then slabs with red mineral flecking their edges. As they dug, the channel walls began revealing subtle, rounded bends, natural curves where gold naturally collects and settles. And those bends grew tighter, deeper, and more compressed. The channel wasn't just a riverbed, it was a funnel, a natural trap engineered by ancient forces to gather gold and hold it in place for eons. Fred paused at the edge, staring into the narrowing bend where the gold seemed to be focusing. The deeper layers shook with the promise of something larger, denser, stranger than anything they'd seen so far. The crew felt it too, the shift in the channel walls, the heaviness in the buckets, the spike in density readings. Whatever was ahead had been collecting gold for centuries, untouched, waiting for one more cut to expose it. So Fred pushed the excavator forward, peeling into the untouched section of the ancient river and sending the first load straight to the plant. The response was instant. The sluice erupted with color the moment the new cut hit the flow, mats choking with smooth, river-worn nuggets that piled into every trap as if someone upstream was dumping treasure by the bucket. Oregon shouldn't produce this kind of volume. This was Yukon-level chaos, the kind of gold that makes a crew fall silent because their brains can't keep up with what their eyes are seeing. Clean-up trays slammed onto the table with enough weight to rattle the frame, and the more they ran, the clearer it became. Something deep inside that hidden bend had been concentrating gold on a scale no one thought possible in this region. Fred followed the channel deeper until he saw the curve that explained everything. A tight, aggressive bend compressed so hard by ancient river pressure that it formed a natural gold trap. In spots like this, heavy material slams into the wall, slows, and drops straight to the bottom, layering into dense sheets over thousands of years. The excavator bucket scraped across the bend and barely moved the first few inches of packed gravel. It strained, groaned, and clawed at a wall so compacted it felt like concrete. That's when Fred knew the motherlode wasn't ahead of them. It was right beneath their feet. When the bucket finally broke through, the ground split open and exposed a wash layer unlike anything the crew had ever seen. A thick, glittering band of pay dirt, loaded with gold, coarse, heavy, and layered so densely it looked like someone had poured liquid metal through the gravel and let it freeze in place. The crew tore into it fast, but methodically, each load heavier than the last, each cleanup bordering on unreal. This wasn't just the best layer of the pit. It was the kind of discovery that rewrites a miner's entire career. And then it shifted again. Beneath the wash layer, an entirely different material emerged, a deep blue-gray pay dirt that made every crew member stop in their tracks. Blue zones don't form just anywhere. They're rare even in the far north, common in ancient glacial paths where ice sheets grind mountains, carry minerals for miles, and then drop them in sudden, ruthless concentration zones. Seeing one in Oregon made no geological sense, yet the color was unmistakable. The texture was unmistakable. This was glacial transport material, the kind that drags gold across vast distances before settling it into deep pockets. If the channel bend had been a natural trap, then the blue zone beneath it was the container that fed it for centuries. That meant the gold here didn't originate anywhere near this pit. It had traveled, it had collected, it had piled up in a place so far off the recorded glacial paths that no geologist ever thought to look. Fred ordered the first bucket from the blue zone, straight to the sluice. The moment the water hit it, slabs of gold the size of knuckles rolled out, thick, heavy pieces, layered with history. Not nuggets, not flakes, slabs. The kind glacial deposits are famous for, the kind that come from crushing ancient, untouched sources. But the blue zone wasn't finished revealing what it had been hiding. While cutting deeper into the newly exposed layer, the excavator struck something solid with a clang that cut through the whole pit. The bucket jolted back, metal on metal, and everyone froze. There was no modern equipment buried here, no records, no markers, no reason anything manufactured should be under 10 feet of untouched blue pay dirt. Fred climbed down, brushing away the soil with his gloves until a rusted metal edge appeared beneath the surface. It wasn't machinery from the last few decades. The steel was older, thicker, built before modern welding. And when they cleared the rest of it, the truth hit them hard. They had uncovered abandoned 1920s mining equipment, drills, frames, and crushed mechanical parts buried deep in a place no one had reported mining. The old miners had reached this blue zone first. Somehow, they found it long before modern crews ever touched the ground. But the condition of the equipment didn't show failure. It showed abandonment. Like they found something so overwhelming, they dropped everything and walked away without recovering a single tool. Fred and 2 crew members pried the largest machine open, unbolting a rusted panel that hadn't seen daylight in nearly a century. Inside were waterlogged papers, ink smeared but still legible enough to make out the writing, old survey notes, layer sketches, depth estimates, and at the bottom, one line written in shaky, frantic strokes. Unrecoverable levels of gold. Equipment cannot handle it. That line kept repeating in different phrasing, scattered across multiple pages. Beyond capacity. Can't process volume. Gold too dense, overloads machinery. These men weren't defeated. They were overwhelmed. They had hit the same blue zone Fred was in now. They had seen the same impossible flow of gold coming out of the river channel. And the machinery of the 1920s simply couldn't deal with what they found. The weight, the density, the volume, it was too much for their sluices, too much for their pumps, too much for them to mine with the technology they had. Fred stared at the rusted equipment, imagining the moment those miners realized what they'd discovered. He pictured them watching their outdated sluice tables collapse under the weight of gold. Pumps clogging instantly, mats overflowing before they could clear them. They hadn't quit because the pit was empty. They quit because it was too full, too rich, too beyond anything they could physically process. And now, Fred was standing exactly where they stood. Only he had the machinery to finish what they started. Machinery strong enough to pull gold the old-timers could only stare at in disbelief. Machinery powerful enough to handle the kind of deposit that breaks history in half. The blue zone wasn't just a rich area. It was the reason the pit became legend. The reason rumors of cursed luck lingered for decades. The reason every miner who tried to work this land failed without ever knowing they were inches away from a geological phenomenon. As the crew cleared more of the area around the buried equipment, The blue zone widened, and the density readings climbed into numbers none of them had ever seen. Something enormous still lay below. Something the old miners never reached, something even the channel bend had only hinted at. The deeper layers darkened into a heavier shade of blue, and every bucket came up straining the excavator arm as if the ground itself was tightening around the load. The shift was unmistakable. The deposit wasn't tapering off. It was building toward a point the miners' notes had warned about, a place marked only once in shaky handwriting, unrecoverable. That was the confirmation Fred needed. He drove the cut straight toward the pocket the old crew couldn't handle, and the reaction was immediate. Gold hit the mats in waves so dense the sluice jets choked and sputtered under the weight, the entire system overwhelmed by a concentration far beyond what it was built for. Instead of flushing lighter material, the water clogged instantly with raw metal, turning the sluice box into a conveyor belt of nothing but gold-rich pay. Every cleanup tray dropped with the thud of solid weight, and when the first test pans touched the water, they didn't float for a moment. They sank straight to the bottom like anchors. Fred ordered the crew to shut everything down so they could rebuild the entire sluice line from the ground up. Bigger jets, higher pressure, reinforced matting, additional riffles. They created a system strong enough to handle the equivalent of mining a Yukon superdeposit, even though they were still standing in a pit Oregon's old-timers had sworn was worthless. When they restarted the run, the modified system finally held together, but only just. The gold kept coming, filling mats at a rate none of them had experienced. Every cleanup felt like cheating. Every bucket felt like pulling treasure from a vault someone forgot to lock. But the numbers told the real story. When the crew finished the first official tally, grain by grain, nugget by nugget, they stared at the total in a kind of stunned silence. They had already passed the value of an entire normal season's haul, and the pit's progress markers showed they had mined only 3% of the total mapped ground. The impossible pocket wasn't a fluke. It was the heart of a deposit so concentrated the old miners had been right to fear it. Fred called in geologists to analyze the full pit, aiming to understand how a dead operation had suddenly turned into one of the richest claims in state history. The team ran volume models, density scans, and channel grid overlays across the site. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. The discovered gold channel didn't end where earlier miners believed. It didn't even end within the boundaries of the registered claim. It stretched far past the western wall, dipped beneath old fault lines, and expanded into a massive gold-bearing zone hidden under the very layers everyone else ignored. The estimates came back conservative, grounded in hard science and decades of goldfield data. Even with the most cautious math, the geologists placed the pit's potential at $95 million in recoverable gold, a number so high it shifted the entire operation into historic territory. Fred didn't shout, he didn't jump, he just stared out over the pit with the quiet realization that he had turned one of Oregon's most mocked, abandoned, and misunderstood mining sites into one of its richest discoveries ever recorded. The crew celebrated in a way miners rarely do, because this wasn't luck, wasn't hype, wasn't wishful thinking. It was measurable, it was real, and it was only the beginning. But even in the middle of the celebration, the scanner crew noticed something strange. A deep reflection under the gold-bearing channel, a signature too dense to be ordinary rock, too perfectly shaped to be natural drift. The anomaly sat far below the blue zone, beneath the ancient channel, deeper than any of the earlier maps ever documented. They passed the scanner across the site again. Same result, same outline, same unnerving shape. A massive, solid form resting exactly under the richest gold the pit had produced. Fred shut the machines down and climbed into the pit himself. The readout didn't behave like a buried boulder. It didn't scatter, it didn't spike irregularly. The density curve was smooth, consistent, and impossibly uniform. It could be a quartz spine. Huge ones exist, but not usually this deep, not usually this shape, and certainly not lined up perfectly beneath a multi-million-dollar channel. Quartz could trap gold. Quartz could bleed gold. Quartz could explain some things, but not all of them. Some of the old-timers whispered that early miners sometimes buried tools or secret vaults to throw off claim jumpers, but nothing this big had ever been recorded. The deeper Fred looked, the stranger the anomaly appeared. It wasn't shaped like fallen debris. It wasn't shaped like collapsed structure. It was shaped like something constructed, or at least something formed in a way geology alone couldn't justify. But the season was ending. The ground was turning unstable, and the machinery couldn't safely push deeper without risking a collapse. Fred marked the spot, logged the depth, sealed the scan files, and walked out of the pit, knowing he had no choice but to leave the anomaly untouched until next season. The crew loaded out for the winter with $95 million of projected gold above them, and a perfectly shaped mystery sitting beneath it. The deeper anomaly pulsed on the final scan like a heartbeat, a reminder that whatever they uncovered this year was only the surface. If the gold above it was worth $95 million, something far older, far heavier, and far stranger was hiding below it, waiting for the first cut of next season.